Welcome to Modus Cafe. Join us for fun, lighthearted, and educational conversations around training, athletic longevity, and the human side of climbing. With your hosts, Mercedes Pollmeyer and Katja Dove.
Hey, we're back with another episode.
Hello, hello.
Hi. Okay, so today we're going to talk about this concept of plateaus. Like, we're going to try to define it and some ways that maybe, that you will overcome your plateau. I believe everyone can overcome a plateau no matter what sport they're training. But we will talk specifically about climbing. Yeah, and I was excited about doing this episode because I feel like in the last couple of emails I've sent and some Instagram posts have been focused around plateaus, because this is actually the biggest reason why I think it's the motivation that athletes have to then seek out a coach, because they've been trying a lot of different things or don't know really like what to do when they've hit this in their mind, a plateau, like nothing's changed. So that would be the number one reason why most of our clients work with us. And yeah, hopefully in this episode we can kind of help with that a little bit, because I think there are some like easy concepts that you can implement.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
yeah.
if you think about plateaus, and we're actually gonna maybe, I did just zoom in. That's crazy technology. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
This technology. Okay, great. So we're gonna talk a little bit about this in a minute. We want to define what plateaus are, but when we think about it, we all have a certain genetic potential, like what we're physically capable of. On top of that, we're gonna add what we're mentally capable of, right? So if you think about it, like we technically could all reach a plateau at some point, but technically for all of us, there should only ever be one true like plateau where we're like really plateauing, where there will not be any change. And that might just be also the top of the mountain, for us.
Yeah.
But most of us are not gonna ever really reach that. Most of us are not really gonna reach our genetic potential. And except for the very, very tippy-toppy athletes. But even for them, I think, we're still making progress in most sports, certainly climbing for that. And now we can think about like, how do we define a plateau? Some people might define a plateau as something shorter-lived, or we just like riffed up this a little bit before we started the podcast. We were really like, well, how do people really define plateaus? And we have our personal stories that we'd like to share. So Mercedes, what do you think, or how do you think people define plateaus? How would you define a plateau? And how can we?
Yeah, normally, I guess when I talk to athletes about their plateau, it's that they are actually looking at a grade and that they haven't moved from that grade. Or maybe they've regressed in that grade. So a lot of the perspective, I think, comes from this grade. And the reason could be for a lot of different factors, but I think what people tend to come to us with is, I don't know what to do. What do I do next? I don't know what my weaknesses are because I feel lost. Or I've tried everything. And so we can talk about all of those things, but I would say that's the biggest, that there hasn't been a change in grade. And for some people that could be, I haven't seen a change in grade in 3 months. And that, okay, we'll talk about that. And some people it's like, okay, I haven't seen a grade change in about a year. Like, okay, yeah. So there is this like kind of range that people have in their mind of like, I should continue, like, see grade progression often. And that might for them define, oh, I've hit a plateau.
Totally. One of the things that I love that you just said naturally is that when we think about a plateau, time matters so much, right? Because I think most people in simplified ways would say they would define a plateau as a lack of improvement, if we had to simplify this. But then the question is like, over what time? What time are we looking at, and I think to really define a plateau. But independent of that, we are going to be, talking about some strategies of how to overcome perhaps perceived plateau. I like to call it perceived plateau. Maybe how to overcome a perceived plateau, or how to change your thinking around plateauing or not. Because for some people, maybe sort of the rate of change or the rate of improvement, it might fluctuate, or it might have changed. Like now they might improve differently, or they might now improve in different areas in their climbing. And so, as you said really beautifully, is like, often people just think about it in terms of grades. I haven't climbed a new grade in a while. And actually, what's really funny, one of the first questions that I will ask people sometimes is then something as simple as, well, how often have you tried? I know it's a very simple question, but not everybody actually tries to actually practically break into the next grade. So I say this because I think sometimes there's sort of this loophole that we have in our own brains, that we think we're on a plateau when maybe we're not on a plateau, or we put ourselves onto a plateau. But the self-made plateaus are the ones that are even easier to break than the ones that might actually mimic a plateau. And so even something as simple as, if you do care about breaking to the next grade, but trying the next grade boulders or routes, then obviously that's one reason. And I say that so simply, but that happens quite often. And I think it happens because people want to feel like they're ready for the next grade before they try the next grade. It's like they want to have permission to be able to even try the next grade. I just had a conversation with an athlete about it. She wants to try this next grade, but she feels like she can't yet, for arbitrary reasons, because she hasn't climbed X number of climbs of the lower grade, for example. And, that's an arbitrary reason. And I just reminded her, I'm like, this is your life. Go have fun, do whatever you want to do, And yeah. Anyway, I'm digressing because I love talking about these things. But
no, I think that would be that might actually be one of the easiest things to do if you are in a plateau, is just try a little harder. As in, sure, maybe the effort that you're putting in, but maybe even just the grade.
Yeah, expose yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, give yourself the opportunity, to move on to the next summit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We also talked about this but just before we started recording. I shared with Mercedes, I'm going to share it with you all. The other day, as I recorded the last podcast episode, I shared a little bit about my own climbing, and I shared some grades, and I was reflecting, and it occurred to me that I have not climbed a new bouldering grade. That's not true in ropes, but I have not climbed a new bouldering grade in 4 years, which I was like, wow, time went by real fast. And partially, that's actually for different reasons, but let me tell you, it is not for the reason that my climbing did not improve. And I just shared with Mercedes that one of the bigger compliments that I've gotten over the last year is when Mercedes Pallmeyer, and I climbed together last, I think, November or so, whenever you came to visit me. And you were like, wow, you've really improved your climbing since I saw you last, which was only a year ago or so. I don't even know when we saw each other before then, but it was not like 4 years ago. And the most important part is that I had felt like my climbing improved so much in those 4 years. My bouldering had improved so much in those 4 years, even though I did not climb a new grade in those 4 years. And which is why it had not even occurred to me that I didn't climb a new grade. I didn't even think about it, because I had just seen the progression in my climbing. And I will say the most important part was how I felt and how I feel when I climb now. I just have this new level of confidence when I try new boulders. And independent of grades, some other ways of how I feel my climbing has really improved is that I can climb harder grades, whatever that means, but harder grades for myself way faster. I can do them pretty fast. My on-site level has come up, so I can now on-site harder problems, and I can also bring more confidence to these harder problems to begin with. I remember when I sent one of my latest sport routes, I remember my friend asked me, so how do you feel about climbing tomorrow, on this route that I was trying to red point? And I was like, I think it'll go. And he was like, wow, you're very confident. And I was like, I am very confident because I know I can climb it. I had no doubt I could do it. It didn't mean that it would go because it's climbing, but I knew I was absolutely capable of doing it. And I sent it, which was also great. So then my friend was like, well, I guess you were right. And I was like, well, it's not about being like cocky or arrogant, right? I mean, this. I love talking about confidence. That's for another podcast, but it's really just like having this deep-seated knowing inside of yourself what you're capable of. And that's how I felt. So I think that was like a huge thing that I've learned over the last 4 years is like having this confidence in my climbing and in myself. Even though maybe from the outside it looks like I hit a plateau because I didn't climb a new grade, in 4 years, which is
But
absolutely not true.
that route that you sent was actually a new grade.
So I wanted to say that. So I
Yeah.
didn't climb a new grade on boulders in 4 years, but I did on sport. So
Yeah.
that is slightly different. So I want to just emphasize this, but I still mostly boulder. So it's not like, oh, she didn't send a new boulder she didn't send a new grade on boulders because she's been climbing on sport. Duh, actually, like, climbing on sport, like doing some sport climbing was more of an excursion from bouldering. So it is slightly different in that I still boulder most of the time. But another reason for why I want to share this, because I think some other people might resonate with this actually. Another reason why I haven't climbed a new grade outside is also simply because I am a busy adult. I don't like to call myself busy. I like to say my life is full. It's full of joy. But I run a wonderful company and I work with an amazing person in this coaching business. It's called Modus Athletica. And I'm also a mom of a 6-year-old son who I just love. So I spend a lot of time with my family. And so really the days that I get to go outside and project hard things, they are limited. As much as I love going outside and Salt Lake City has great access, they are still limited compared to some of my friends who don't have a family. And so I honestly also just haven't tried a ton of new big projects over the last couple of years. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. My climbing has still improved, even though I haven't sent a new grade.
And you're seeing improvement in the gym.
Absolutely. And as I said, I feel like the biggest improvement that I'm seeing for myself is also just how I feel about my climbing. Whether or not that is a new grade, but I'm also able to send different styles of problems of the same grade. I'm able to send them inside and outside. I can go to different areas and still, climb relatively hard for my own level. And again, it comes down to how I feel. I think that's the most important part.
Yeah.
So I told Mercedes before this podcast, I feel like in my life, I feel like I have not reached a plateau yet in my climbing. And part of that is also perspective. And Mercedes actually said she felt the same way. Do you want to share how you feel about plateaus and your climbing?
I definitely feel like I haven't reached a plateau in phases that I've been trying to push to the next grade. I've definitely had years where I barely climbed. And of course, I regressed, like climbing once, maybe twice a week was not going to get me to the next level. And so like those years were frustrating, but I never really said to myself, oh, I'm in a plateau. I'm like, this is the best I can do right now. And so like for me, when I've really put the effort in, I've always seen improvement. And it like for me, it has been great improvements, but also some of these other aspects of like now I feel like I can on site, V5 at least outside almost anywhere except maybe Fontainebleau. Except Fontainebleau, and that was a huge change for me. Being able to do better on slab, like that was a huge learning process for me. Like I would avoid slab like the plague. I did not want to climb on slab ever. And just by focusing on that, it gave me a lot of maybe it ignited some purpose in my climbing as well. Like, oh, this is why I climb. Like this is beautiful movement, a new style. It's super cool. Yeah. So I also feel like I haven't really like hit a plateau. And right now I'm in a phase where I was injured. I've been a little sick the last couple months, and so it has been really hard for me to train. And so I'm kind of in that dip right now. But again, I'm hardly showing up at the climbing gym. Like I'm still doing other things, but I'm not expecting to climb double digit again in a couple months. Like that's just not possible. So like some of it could be expectations, but let's talk about some of these smaller ways, because like hopefully you're seeing that a plateau might not really mean the thing that you think it means. And it could be that you need to dig deep in yourself a little bit and see these other ways that you have improved in climbing. And if you don't know what those things are, it might mean you have to start measuring those things. Um, so there are a couple of reasons why maybe you have stayed at the same grade. Let's just talk about that first. One is maybe you've been doing the same thing and trying the same level of climbing for a while. Maybe you've been doing it for 6 months, a year, couple years. I know people who have been climbing the same level for the like 3 or 4 years and haven't changed anything. But they're not satisfied with that. Like they complain about it. So that means, okay, it's time to change something.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
what got you here is not going to get you there.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great that you got here, but if you want to go somewhere else, you do need to
Yeah.
do something else.
Yes. And so like for those people, just like what Katya and I said, like maybe you just got to try a little harder. Try a little harder, change even just one thing. You know, a good place to start would be like, what's your biggest weakness? And put some effort into that weakness once a week. Give that at least 2 months before you decide to take that out. You know, you do have to, people are a little impatient and they get comfortable with like, no, I really like doing these things, so I'm just going to keep doing these things. You have to get out of your comfort zone, do some things that feel really gross sometimes, and just keep doing it. And I guarantee you're going to see a change. And so where you see that change, we're going to go into that in a second. So the first one was you might be hitting a plateau because you just haven't changed anything. The second one is if you've been changing too many things too frequently and kind of like chasing the shiny object syndrome. I see more of that. I see more of the FOMO. Like I saw this on Instagram. Oh, I heard this on a podcast. Oh, I got to do all of these things.
Yeah. And the typical thing that I hear then is like, I have tried all the things. I'm still not improving. And the question is, well, how long have you tried all the things? One, did you give each thing a chance to even work? Like it's like the anxious syndrome, this idea of, well, I started it yesterday and I don't see improvement today. That means I must not be working, so I need to move on. Or doing too many things at once, which was me before I did MPT. I did just too many things, so my body just didn't even have a chance to go into performance mode because my body was always tired.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that's like another reason why people do hit a plateau is where they're training to the point of fatigue. Maybe they don't notice that they're tired, but they are training either too long or a little bit too hard over and over again. And that doesn't allow your body to adapt to the thing that you're doing. I see this happen a lot in, anxious folks, super anxious. And I see this at the top level. That is the easiest fix. I feel like for elite climbers, we just give them some deloading strategies and all of a sudden they're starting to like send harder than they ever did.
That also includes, you know, doing the stuff that people do between training sessions.
Yeah.
You know, what's not climbing training, but maybe training for other things at the same time. Maybe just like doing too much altogether. And I actually just had a conversation with a friend about this too, this idea of feeling anxious about not being sure if something is going to work and then trying to change too many things because now you're listening to all these podcasts, you're reading all these things, you're watching this on Instagram, you feel like you need to do all the things at the same time. And I told her that's the beauty of having a training plan. Is once you have a training plan, you can just trust the plan and you don't have to keep adding things. And this is what I had to learn. I, trust the training plan. And I feel like I want to do more, but I also know if I do the training plan, I'm going to get stronger only if I only do what's in the training plan. And so it gives me a peace of mind really when I do that. So Yeah, I think just like
Yeah.
changing things too frequently is definitely another
Yeah.
reason why people might not be able to adapt to the
Mhm.
changes that they did implement.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that comes back to structure as well, where when you have some structure and then you trust, like you just show up and keep doing those things, eventually something will change. It's rare that I have never seen a change in an athlete when we put them on a program, you know, and not even like a program that is insanely harder, because that doesn't often work either. It's like meeting them where they're at, let's just change a couple different things, and change always happens.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the small things. So I guess maybe before we even talk about that is, so when we talk about plateaus, we are measuring ourselves to this grade. Like, okay, I've been at this grade for so long. Grades are probably for you, for everybody, very motivating. Like, yes, I want to hit the next grade, and that's what's motivating me to show up. But what happens when those grade jumps happen at a much slower rate? And it does happen, you know, like V1 to V4 for a lot of people can happen relatively quickly in a couple, like I would say like a couple of years, you'll see that jump. Some people do it in a much shorter time. Some people it takes longer. But it eventually slows down, you know, because it does get harder and harder as you get better and better. It is harder to improve specific things. And that's when you really have to now come back to some of the smaller measurables, whether that's qualitative or quantitative. This is where you're going to start to see improvements rather than just looking at the grade. So, you know, we talk a lot about 1% better at Modus. You know, like this is a concept from that I heard from Atomic Habits guy,
James Clear.
James Clear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he talked about that English cycling coach who introduced 1% improvements across the board. And these are elite cyclists, you know, and they wanted to win the championship. And so instead of just trying to like get a better time, he's like, you know what? Let's make a 1% improvement across the board. Let's make your bike fit better. Let's change your pillow so you're sleeping a little bit better. Let's enhance your protein intake, you know, like all of these little things. And when you see those little like, oh yeah, like I did get a little bit better here. Oh, I did get a little bit better here. You do show up more confident, just like what you were saying, Katya.
Yes, because you can see the improvements, and the 1% better, it's also easier to commit to that. You know, I think sometimes it's hard to commit to something big. And so sometimes it can be easier to be like, hey, today I'm showing up for this month. My goal is to be 1% better. And you can define for yourself what this is. Because I think one of the things that I wanted to say is the last kind of like way of plateauing is actually maybe not being, I don't want to call this being honest with yourself, but maybe not being as observant of how consistently you've actually been trying. Because I do get athletes too who say they have been training for years, but then when we go into the details, it's like, oh, they have been doing random training cycles for a couple years where they train like 2 or 3 times a year for like 6 weeks or something. But they actually, because I don't know, that's the biggest misconception I feel like I find some in some of my athletes is that you train and then you don't train. And then you train again, and then you don't train. Whereas at Modus, we like train year round, but the training changes significantly. It changes when you're in performance season for sure, because what changes is the intention of each season. But we are improving year round. And if you're improving year round, you're like continuing to like, you know, improve over the years, and you're not really hitting a plateau because we are always like working on this 1% better. We are changing our intentions, but we're always, so to speak, training, right? And I think sometimes when people think, oh, I have been training, but I'm not seeing improvements, they're actually going through these cycles where, you know, they train and then they stop. So then I don't say everything goes out the window because I don't believe that, but, and then they start training again, but they have some catching up to do. And that might not be working as well. That could also be like taking time off climbing, depending on where the athlete is at, and then coming back. And so I think the 1% better can really help with that consistency too. Like staying consistent, like, work on one thing. If you're not feeling great, or if you have an upper body injury, maybe you could work on slab climbing. Literally, the beauty about climbing is it's so multifaceted. There's so many aspects of climbing. And I think that's actually one of the things I've done really well over the years, is kind of like adapting, like edit, don't cancel, make some changes to your training, but don't just stop training altogether. When I hurt my ankles, I, climb on ropes versus boulders, or, I just, I come up with, there's ways of modifying exercises.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think with the 1% better, what you can do now is define progress for yourself. And there are so many buckets that you can choose from. So how do you choose these buckets of measurement? And it really comes down to identifying your weaknesses. And I mean, there's like a lot to choose from, but some easy things could be, like, can you lock off? Like, can you hold like a bar 90 degree for 10 seconds? If that's a struggle, that's a good place to start building that up. And that's going to transfer over to your climbing, because now you can hold yourself in a specific position. And that is going to really, like, being able to lock off, that is going to open up so many doors.
Yeah. Maybe even just strength training in general. If you are a climber who has done all sorts of, climbing drills and climbing improvement, but you've never really focused on any just general strength training, that could really help you too.
Yeah. And it's easy to identify weaknesses when you strength train. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
we do these assessments. We do assessments, and based on that, it tends to be really easy for us to be like, oh yeah, this is what you should be working on. And people think it's magic, where, it's really simple. It comes down to very simple principles.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Or, do you lack power? Well, you can train power, and it doesn't even have to be a long cycle. You can focus on power. Or like we have these assessments even for endurance, even for boulderers, who feel like, oh, I don't need endurance, but it can really, if your baseline endurance improves. And that's a really easy way of measuring it too. And if you can bring up your endurance, chances are good you'll also be, climbing harder things, because you have a lot more capacity to be climbing harder things.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. Improving your on-sighting, like very intentionally trying to work on your on-sighting. It can really help your route reading skills. It can really help your climbing intuition and your sort of flexible adjustment on the wall, like making quick decisions on the wall and really getting that feeling for body position as you're trying to on-sight.
Yeah.
That's a really, fun way of trying to see improvements in your climbing. I mean, obviously, I'm a fan of switching it up, because I love to boulder and lead climb. So it's just switching it up too sometimes, like trying a different type of sport within the sport could be really helpful too, and teach you a lot. If you're a rope climber mostly, and you even just, boulder for a month or two, I bet you it will be really great for your sport climbing too.
Yeah, so we've listed a bunch of things. So first, identify what you're going to be measuring. How are you going to define progress? What is you going to be like? What's your 1% better? And maybe only choose one or two things to change in your week that you're going to physically work on in your session. You could also, like, things off to the side that you could try that's not climbing specific, is like small changes in nutrition, your sleep, stress levels, anxiety. But when you add too many of those up, it can start to feel overwhelming. And now you're not sticking to a program long enough for there to create change. So it's better to just choose one or two things, add that, and give it at least 8 weeks, minimum 8 weeks. I would say give it 3 months. And measure that thing at the end of every session. Just check in, like, how did I do with that today? And even just that, just checking in with yourself and putting some intention, man, I think that makes, like, mentally, it feels like, oh yeah, like I'm working towards a thing. And if anyone's interested, I am doing a mindful movement challenge right now. You can find that on my Instagram. I think, again, it comes down to this intentionality in your movement, like what Katya was talking about with the on-sighting. Like on-sighting really flexes that muscle of improvisation, making quick decisions. And for some people, technique, some people don't know how to work on technique. And if you just change the intention of your movement, that's going to change your technique. So that's another bucket that you could look at for improvement.
Yeah, so many
Yeah.
options.
Yeah. So that's basically it. And I think it's maybe also, we're going to hopefully talk about this in a podcast of defining progress, and like, is defining yourself based on grade the best thing? Defining yourself as a climber and like your value, you know, but think about that as a question. Like, what is it that you're measuring? How do you define yourself? And is defining yourself through grades the best for you?
Totally. That was a nice way to end.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you all for listening, and continue the journey.
Continue the journey. All right. We'll see y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.